A few years ago, Horizon Zero Dawn reignited my love for video games. When I was a sophomore in college, games began to bore me, so I made an incredibly stupid decision. I sold my PS4. At the time, it seemed like the right move, because I wasn't playing many games, and I had, shall we say, other priorities. It wasn't long until the magnitude of my decision set in. So, in a few months' time, I started checking Craigslist multiple times a day, looking for a PS4 that fit my budget, which was modest. Eventually, I found one for $120 from someone who lived next door to a strip club called Knockers, and that he was selling it so cheap because, in his words, he needed rent like 2 days ago. I, being the generous soul that I am, was more than happy to help this man. Now that I had a PS4 back in my life, I needed something to play, and there was no question what it would be: Horizon Zero Dawn. From the minute this game was announced, I knew that I was going to love it. And by the time I got around to it, I was right. I'll be the first to tell you that it's far from perfect, but the experience I had with this game is, in my opinion, the epitome of what makes people fall in love with games in the first place. Running around Horizon's world filled me with wonder and amazement as I explored its mysteries and mastered its combat. I loved the main character, the world building, the downright stunning landscapes, but above all, I loved the robot dinosaurs. Horizon Zero Dawn is set in the far future, where humans have reverted back to their tribal ways and appear to have almost no knowledge of their long-deceased ancestors. They aren't the dominant species either. Instead, what took their place are animal-like machines. The relationship between the humans and the machines is what I imagine our ancient ancestors' relationship was with the animals of their time. They both respect and fear the machines for their power and grace. They provide valuable resources, and they even formulate an entire mythology surrounding their existence. Your time as the main character, Aloy, an outcast whose origins are unknown, has you journey through the world as you search for answers as to how all of this and you came to be. On paper, the premise for Horizon Zero Dawn seems like a B-tier movie concept on the level of Sharknado. It's Vikings fighting robot dinosaurs. As the developers at Guerrilla Games put it, this comes dangerously close to breaking the rule of cool. Just because you keep adding more and more things on top of each other that individually might be cool, doesn't mean that they will amount to something believable, or more importantly, engaging. Unabashed absurdity does have its place in storytelling though. I guess it just depends on what kind of story you're trying to tell. Something like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy never really takes itself too seriously, and readers know this. So when the characters find themselves in yet another preposterous situation, you know to just go with the flow. But stories that lean more on the grounded end of the spectrum should probably think twice before upping the ante. Horizon set out to tell a story that is essentially both of these things at once. Simultaneously, you have both a world filled with robot dinosaurs that don't make any logical sense, and a narrative that somehow feels based in reality. You would think that the latter carries the weight of the former when playing the game, but really, it's the machines that do the heavy lifting. Now, Aloy's story is gripping in its own right. In fact, her story is completely intertwined with that of the machines, and by the end, you will get many of your questions about this post-apocalyptic world answered. However, for as much as discovering Aloy's origins warrants the player's attention, what really sells everything are the machines. Not because they're everywhere, characters constantly talk about them, or you depend on them for resources to progress in the game, but because Guerrilla Games truly makes you care about them. Despite them being pre-programmed and cold, they emanate a feeling of life. You see them interact with the world and each other and begin to wonder about their purpose and design and why both look totally foreign, yet oddly familiar. They're so unique that I found myself spending hours scouring the edges of the map solely in hopes to find a new one. When I was away from the game, I would daydream about other possible permutations that could be hidden in the world. Over time, I began to feel almost forced to unravel the mystery of their origins because they were so compelling. Not to say that I wouldn't have finished the game otherwise, but if the machines weren't so great, I don't know if I would have cared nearly as much, and I don't know if other players would have either, especially in light of the game's shortcomings outside of the machines. They don't render the game unplayable by any means, but they are noticeable, especially to veterans of the open world genre. Many who have played Horizon liken its open world design to that of Ubisoft published games like Assassin's Creed and Far Cry, which isn't necessarily a fault per se, but it also means it can't be called original. The in-game economy is so flooded with items that it's hard to even know what you're picking up and what each item's purpose is. And perhaps most disappointing for me personally is close quarters combat, especially human to human. It leaves a lot to be desired. But those flaws were really easy for me to look past when the machines offered something so fresh right from the start. So, what is it about them that makes them such refreshing characters? Most notably, it's their design. While we've seen countless renditions of robots across movies, television, and games, what distinguishes Horizon in particular is that the design of its robots are far and away their most important characteristic. Take characters like R2-D2 and C-3PO for example. If we're going to stick with the robot theme, they aren't wildly inventive looking, but their endearing banter and active narrative utility is what makes them lasting characters. But the look and animalistic behavior of Horizon's machines needed to grab the player's attention immediately and consistently. Otherwise, they wouldn't have sparked players' curiosity, which is the game's quintessential driving force. They can't convince us to care about them themselves with specific character moments like an epic monologue or a heroic deed. Their overall design needed to do the talking for them. Originally, the machines looked much more like something out of the franchise that put Guerrilla Games on the map, Killzone. They had a militaristic design with sharper angles and an unnatural aesthetic. But as the team leaned more and more into the machines being a replacement for animals, their designs evolved to reflect that. This change was important for two reasons. One being that a world of tribal hunting humans, specifically Aloy, felt much more at home next to animals, or at least something that resembled them. But also, if the robots had looked like machines of war, then a large portion of their mystique wouldn't have been present. This is evidenced by a few warlike machines that are in the game. They've been lying dormant since humanity's downfall and are resurrected by the game's antagonists. As soon as you lay your eyes on them, you have a pretty clear understanding of their purpose, as their design stands in stark contrast to that of the more abundant machines found in the world. That being said though, the main roster of robots each appear to fill an ecological void left by their real-world counterparts. So there is some inclination as to what they're doing moment to moment, however their grand reason for existence is still unknown. And honestly, the fact that their behavioral patterns and designs are vaguely familiar only adds to the intrigue. But the machines needed to be more than just something cool to look at from a distance. They needed to be fun to hunt and fight. Each machine type has unique movesets, weak points, temperaments, and there's always the possibility that you'll be fighting multiple types at one time. The variation from machine to machine also encourages the player to utilize the equally varied weapon catalog, but it doesn't necessarily force you to. You can succeed without using what best suits fights with particular robots, but combat is certainly at its best when you're creatively using the tools that the game has to offer. The game's combat is geared towards keeping your distance from your opponents, but that can be hard to manage during large encounters because many of the machines have attacks that close the gaps you create. Couple that with the game's deficiencies in close quarters combat, engagements might be frustratingly prolonged by the shaky controls. But the sheer variety of enemies is such a welcome change of pace from other games that it's easy to look past this small hiccup. When the gameplay of a title is so centered around its combat, something like enemy diversity can be crucial, otherwise things might grow stale. Not Horizon though. Its large assortment of machines ensures that combat will stay engaging throughout a player's journey, and ultimately prevent the game's issues from overshadowing its accomplishments. The machines in Horizon Zero Dawn had to carry an enormous amount of weight. Not because the game outside of them is a disaster, far from it, but the machines are the game's entire initial draw. Both the gameplay and story needed them to be irresistible, otherwise the allure of the rest of the world would have suffered. Their designs, variety, and overall value is a testament to the passion Guerrilla Games created them with, and that value puts them in the pantheon of characters whose very inclusion makes them the lifeblood of their respective games.